Oh, you're gonna wear a hat? You're gonna wear a hat today. Okay.
See if this helps me at all. This is being recorded, right? No, screw that. I don't
No,
I
it'll
don't
be
want to
good.
risk it
It's a nice visual.
just for a change.
Welcome to Thriving is the Goal, a podcast about how to thrive in work and life. My name is Tim Chan. I'm a business coach. I run a small marketing company, and I'm also a certified working genius facilitator.
My name is Mark Letchumanan. I'm a chartered financial analyst, executive coach in training, and a student of small business.
Well, in today's session, we're going to do a deep dive on the working geniuses of wonder and invention. What does it feel like to have these geniuses? What does it feel like to have these as frustrations? What are tips for people with these geniuses and with these frustrations? And what are tips for working with teammates or people that you know that have these geniuses and frustrations? We'll get into all that today. But first, let's do a quick review of the 6 stages of work of the working genius. So remember, it spells out the word widget, W-I-D-G-E-T. And so that's wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. So the first 2 geniuses fall under this category of ideation. So that's kind of identifying the need, coming up with the idea for how to solve that problem. And so ideation incorporates wonder, which asks the question, and then invention, which comes up with the ideas or possible solutions. And the next 2 geniuses fall under the activation category. So this step often is overlooked. And activation incorporates discernment, which assesses the workability of the idea or solution, and galvanizing, which gets people excited about it and moving forward. And together, they kind of activate the work and get it started. And the last 2 geniuses fall under the implementation category. And so implementation incorporates enablement and tenacity. And so people with the working genius of enablement are ready to support and assist in the implementation of the idea or solution. And tenacity ends up finishing, completing the project.
So we'll talk now about how working geniuses and frustrations are very consistent over time. They're core parts of our personalities and dispositions, and they don't really change. So I'll give you a couple of examples for myself. So one of my working geniuses is discernment. And when I was a kid, I remember I loved looking at all the stats for baseball games, basketball games, hockey games. And whenever I played or traded sports cards, I would always look at the stats of each player on the back. I just enjoyed comparing these numbers, looking at the numbers, trying to understand them. And I would do this over and over again with thousands and thousands of cards until eventually I developed a gut feel for the stats of what a good player would have and the stats of what maybe a bad player would have whenever we did our fantasy leagues. And so that's the other aspect of discernment. So not only enjoying analyzing and comparing options, but also having a strong gut feel. And I developed that because I liked looking at the numbers till eventually it became a feel sort of thing. And that was evident from early days, from grade 3, 4, 5, 6 onward. A working frustration for me has always been enablement. And I remember in school again, whenever I'd finish my class assignment or homework first, my teachers would always ask me to help my classmates who are still struggling with their work. And I remember loving to give people the answers and show them exactly what I did, but I hated having to help my classmates learn it for themselves and walk them through the steps and help them understand why. That always just felt like pulling teeth for me. And to this day, I struggle with that. It's not as fun for me. I'd rather just give them the answer, solve the problem, and be on to the next thing.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about working geniuses and frustrations being consistent over time. I remember in high school, I just came across my school magazine that we put together. It's called The Motley Minds. Shout out to my friends Oliver and Lucas, who were the editors of this magazine. But I looked at my role in the magazine, and I was in charge of the bulletin board. And the bulletin board was like trying to get people to write secret messages to friends and things like that. And so it really required me to just go out and ask a ton of people to make submissions to this bulletin board. And that really for me is like, oh, I did a lot of galvanizing. And so it's interesting that I had gravitated towards doing that role on the team. And I think one of the implications that your working geniuses and frustrations are consistent over time is that some people say, hey, you should build your weaknesses, get better at what you're weak at. But those frustrations will always cost you a lot of energy, even if you improve on your skill of them. So it doesn't really make that much sense for you to kind of shore up on your frustrations. Rather, it makes more sense just to stay consistent and get better at your geniuses, because you're going to be joyful and enjoy those a lot more.
Okay, so if we dive into wonder a little bit, can you start us off, Tim, with just a quick definition or explanation of what wonder is again?
Yeah. So wonder is this ability to look around and observe your environment, the people around you, or the organization around you, or just even culture or opportunities. And they're the people that see the problems that exist or the opportunities for improvement. They'll ask the questions. There's a lot of curiosity in wonder. So that's kind of what wonder is. What does that feel like for you? Because I know you have the genius of wonder.
Yeah, so the gift of wonder, again, it's the least appreciated, seemingly valued of the geniuses, because it often just looks like a person staring out into space and having random thoughts and then sharing that with everybody who may or may not care about what it might look like if all the slides in the world were pink and went up instead of down, or just some ridiculous thought. But having the gift of wonder, and people who have it, you can't even help this. Your brain just goes there. You're really driven by curiosity, and you just can't help but ask these questions. And an interesting thing about having the genius of wonder is that it just leaves you feeling excited or hopeful or joyful just having these thoughts. For example, Dave Chappelle, super popular comedian, he's explained his working process, which usually just looks like him sitting at his table and just staring off into space. And then every once in a while snickering to himself as he's sort of writing these jokes and thinking of these funny and humorous situations in his mind. That's what wonder often looks like. It's energizing, it's exciting, it's fun, it's a pleasant activity, at least for me, that I look forward to. I love sitting down for a cup of coffee with a friend, feeding off their energy and just going back and forth, shooting ideas and wondering what the world could look like. And people with the gift of wonder often use the words, oh, I wonder what would happen if, or I wonder what it might look like if. And for me in particular, one way this plays out is when I'm reading a really good book or listening to a great podcast, or if I'm reading an article, sometimes my brain is so excited about what I'm reading or seeing or listening, I need to stop for a few minutes. I just sort of chew on it and I savor it, kind of like the way a wine tester just swishes the wine in their mouth before spitting it out. I kind of do the same thing in my head, just kind of thinking through the thoughts that excited me and were giving me, I guess, nice dopamine hits of feeling. So that's sort of what wonder feels like.
And I've come to really appreciate people with the genius of wonder. I got to spend time just this week with a friend, a close friend who has wonder as a genius. And it's really interesting to talk to him because he'll ask these questions that I'll never think about. He'll make these observations that I won't even have considered or have seen. And it's pretty interesting because he will answer my questions. He'll start with a story and he'll just go off on a tangent and kind of go wander off there. And then it's a little bit of wandering in his thinking. And then he'll come back and answer the question. And so I just really appreciate how people with wonder can uncover those opportunities for improvement. And they ask the questions that lead to innovation. They have that observant awareness. They see things that people completely miss or overlook. And it leads to some amazing conversations, ideas, decisions, and results. Now let's talk about wonder as a frustration. So I've coached a few people with the working frustration in wonder. And what they'll say is the activity of wonder really feels kind of abstract. that there's not a lot of certainty or tangible steps in those conversations and questions. And so, one person told me, if something's working, why change it? Why ask those questions? And so when a wonder conversation is happening, they'll often feel kind of this tension because they can't really see the practical action-oriented tasks related to the questions and things that come up. So Mark, what are some tips for people with the genius of wonder? You talked about them being the most misunderstood. What can the people with the genius of wonder do to better work with the people around them?
Okay, so for people with the genius of wonder, here's some advice I would share. First, let those in your team know you're wondering. Let them know you're just thinking out loud and that they don't necessarily need to act on any of your thoughts or ideas, because it can be a pain in the butt to have someone constantly being like, I wonder what would look like if we did this, or I wonder what would happen if that. This can really stress out people who are ready to take action and just do something, because now you've given them all these ideas and they don't even know where to start. If you're working with someone with a genius of wonder, you've got to let them ask their questions and you've got to let them work out loud, and just be patient until you find something, if you've got the genius of invention or discernment, that you feel can be acted on. And if you're working with someone with a genius of wonder, once you find that thing that can be acted on, let them know, hey, great idea. Now let's really flesh this out because it feels like you're onto something here. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, those are great. And here are some tips for people with the frustration of wonder. So if you have a working frustration in wonder, here's what you can do. You can opt out of those vision or brainstorming meetings, get them to send you the notes after they've made a decision. You don't need to be a part of all of that because you're going to find that really draining. People with the frustration of wonder often also have the geniuses of enablement and tenacity, and sometimes both. And so they'll want to know the practical aspects, but that's kind of on the opposite end of the flow of work. And so most of the questions in wonder will never actually make it past invention, discernment, and galvanizing. So most of them you don't really need to worry about yet. Now in the working genius, they have these things that each type craves and is crushed by. And so, Mark, why don't you run that through with us for wonder?
Sure. So crave would be something that you hunger for or yearn for or desire for. It's not completely necessary, but having some of it would be nice. So someone with the genius of wonder, they crave being told, oh, that's a good question, or, oh, that's an interesting thought. It's a total affirmation, a total pat on the back, because you're basically affirming something that came out of this person with the genius of wonder that was totally natural for them. They were basically just being themselves and got affirmed for that, which is a terrific feeling. People with the genius of wonder also often crave the space and time to let their thoughts float and wander around so that they can actually be themselves and come up with these ideas. If you really want to break someone with the genius of wonder's heart, if you really want to crush them, basically just say, who cares? Like, these thoughts aren't doing anything. What's the point of all this talk? It goes on and nothing ever happens. That would definitely bring me down. People with the genius of wonder are often crushed by the interpretation that they're just daydreaming and not adding value. I think secretly they often feel like, oh, like I'm in my head a lot and have all these great ideas, but they themselves don't see the value in it. They need an inventor or someone with discernment to appreciate them, see the good there, and then take that baton and keep running with it. So can you tell us, Tim, what a team with wonder is like?
Yeah, this will be the last thing we'll talk about to wrap up this section. But as I've been coaching teams, I've been noticing that certain teams that don't have a lot of wonder genius, here's what could happen. The team ends up getting too busy to really notice. So they're very slow to identify some of the big opportunities and problems. And those issues can continue over and over again without anyone asking, can there be a better way? And so that's really what the value of the genius of wonder is in a team, is to be observant and to notice things and to see where improvements could be had. So let's move on to the genius of invention, the second one. So this is one of my working geniuses. And for me, it feels like just coming up with ideas all day long, over and over again. I just love kind of brainstorming. And it's just really fun to just dream up of crazy ideas, even if we would never, ever do them. Just thinking about the possibility is fun and enough for me. And so sometimes what I like doing is kind of smashing ideas together, combining them. Whenever there's a challenge or problem, my go-to is to create ideas and solutions. And that often sometimes can get a little bit annoying, but that's just who we are. My wife, Olive, and I both have the genius of invention. And we spent a year as full-time writers, and we wrote 2 books and published 3 blog posts every week. And we knew other writers that really struggled with thinking about what to write, but we never had that struggle. I see solutions for other writers that are like writing prompts, but I never really understood this because we always had this flow of ideas. And so Olive and I each had a running document of topics that we could write about, and it was just full of ideas. And we always had more ideas than we had capacity to write. And that's kind of what it feels like to have the genius of invention.
Like what I love about the genius of invention, Tim, is just the practicality of inventors. And so not only do they have ideas, but often they even do something about it. Inventors aren't necessarily consumed with producing the highest quality product or article or piece of work right off the bat, but they are driven to just get something out there to start with, and then they'll roll with that, which I also love, because inventors don't need things to be perfect the first time, unless they have the gift of tenacity, then they might need it to be perfect the first time. And so what's helpful is, especially for someone like me with the genius of discernment, I love taking what an inventor has started and then tweaking it and refining it and revising it and smashing it with another idea. It's a lot of fun working with someone with the gift of invention. So now let's talk about what having invention as a working frustration feels like. It often feels like staring at not just a regular blank piece of paper. It's like a monumental mural that's totally blank, and you need to fill this thing with something good, and you have no idea where to begin. It's daunting, it's overwhelming. Brainstorming meetings to figure out what to put on this giant white mural are draining. It's hard to come up with new, innovative ideas or solutions. So it's not easy. And this is probably why invention gets valued so much. It's truly a gift because you can see the result of it, whereas with everything else, you can't start really until you have invention.
Yeah, that makes sense. So here are some tips for people with the genius of invention. So first of all, discern the right time to share your ideas. So when people share a problem or challenge with you, they don't always need solutions. And I sometimes always assume that's my kind of go-to is I hear a problem challenge, boom, let me come up with 5 solutions for you. No, sometimes people just want you to listen to them. My wife has taught me that a lot. So before you offer ideas, sometimes it might be good just to ask if it would be helpful. Another tip is when you do have a great idea, or when I sometimes have a great idea, I feel this urge to share it right away. And often that involves interrupting whoever's speaking at the moment. And so when you have that idea, you don't always need to blurt it out. Sometimes I feel like I need to because it just feels like such a great idea. I just need to kind of put it out there for people. But you know what? I've learned that I can write things down. So, as people are having a conversation, explaining something, and I come up with some great ideas, I can write it down. And then when it's my turn to speak, then share those ideas. Another tip is just to be aware that you're probably going to have more bad ideas than good ideas. As I'm brainstorming and throwing ideas out there, most of them are going to get shot down with people with discernment, like yourself, Mark. You just shoot down so many of my ideas. But, that's a good thing because a lot of them are terrible ideas. And sometimes because I created the idea, I can't tell what's great and what's not so great. I've learned not to be too attached to any one of my ideas, to just be like, okay, I'm just going to create a bunch, knowing that 1 or 2 out of 10 may actually be any good. And so it's good to kind of get feedback on your ideas and to take that feedback, and you can use that feedback to to almost recreate new ideas based on that feedback. And so there's a little bit of a process between people with invention and discernment where you generate ideas, they discern, give you feedback, and you kind of go back to the drawing board and take that and create more new ideas. I think the last tip I have for people with invention is know when to stop, because we could just have tons of fun creating ideas, but at some point you kind of need to stop and start evaluating. And so don't stay in that invention stage for too long.
For people who have invention as a working frustration, some simple tips to help you get going. You could work with templates. There's a ton with all the software Microsoft offers or any one of these other software providers. This is why I love software like Canva. They give you a great starting point for you to create a marketing piece or an advertising piece. You could beg, borrow, and steal ideas from other people. In the investing world, there's a really popular investor who likes to call it cloning, and he just steals the ideas of the most successful investors out there because he just admits he's not smart enough to come up with those on his own. You could do searches on the internet. You could use ChatGPT to help brainstorm. You could book a conversation with someone with the genius of invention. There's lots of ways to work around not having the genius of invention. So please don't feel like you need to be an original Picasso for every new project.
Yeah, makes sense. So people with the genius of invention crave and crush these things. We really crave freedom. So I just love to have that space to create ideas and the freedom to do thought experiments and think what would happen if we tried these things out without really having kind of any constraints. And so the thing that we are crushed by is constraints. When people apply too much realism to the brainstorming process, it can feel quite deflating, especially when it feels like people are shooting down my ideas before they've even considered the possibility.
So now let's talk about what it looks like for a team without invention. And basically, they're unable to innovate. They keep recycling old ideas and products. They're stuck at the wonder questions. And so where opportunities have been identified, no one's able to come up with practical and real solutions. And so I think a team without the gift of invention often feels stuck or stagnant or complacent.
So that concludes our session today. In our next episode, we're going to do a deep dive on the working geniuses of discernment and galvanizing. So Mark, that's one of your geniuses, and I have the other. And so we'll be sharing from our personal experiences as well as experience of people that we've worked with and coached. Thanks, Mark, for an excellent conversation today. And thanks to our listeners for joining us.
Take care, everyone.